Hello, everyone, and welcome to our podcast, Clear as Mud, where we talk to artists from all walks of life about their personal and professional journeys. I'm your host, Graham Waltrip. As always, our show is presented by Mudstack, the only asset management and collaboration platform custom built for game studios and digital artists. For more information, please visit mudstack.com. On today's show, you'll meet Bobby Wertheim, VP of Partnerships at Curve Games, a company that specializes in publishing independent games. Bobby's main role is going on globetrotting adventures to find games he believes in to pick up and distribute. So if you're making a game and looking for a publisher, listen up, because Bobby's going to tell you the qualities he looks for when evaluating developers and their work, and the topics that must be hit in pitches to truly capture a publisher's attention. We also cover other projects that Bobby has worked on in his career, such as Heavy Rain and Sonic Generations. And speaking of Heavy Rain, about 50 minutes or so into this interview, a hard rain does begin to fall in London, where Bobby was when we did this interview. And you can definitely hear it. So we tried to minimize the sound on that as much as we could, but when you talk about heavy rain, I guess the sky finds a way to respond. We hope you enjoy our interview with Bobby, and I'll see you on the other side to wrap up the show. All right, so Bobby, you did some things that are very unrelated to video games before you got into the industry. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure thing. Yeah, it is a bit quite the extraordinary leap, because I was on one end. I started off as an antique dealer in my career. Really, I was doing like lots of other things, but really it was the antique dealing thing that was like my thing. And specifically, I was into ukiyo-e, Japanese woodblock prints, like the Hokusai wave. So like ukiyo-e was my thing, and I was an antique dealer. And then I've transitioned to video games, which is like, you know, from super old school, old stuff, quite literally, to cutting edge interactive technology. It's they're polar opposites to each other, right?
So what made you want to make that transition?
So it was like I was doing the antique thing. I'll set the scene. I was living in London, in Kensington, which is one of the most expensive boroughs in the world. And I had a nice bachelor pad. I'd met my wife doing the antique thing. And one day we were having a conversation, and she was like, I don't think you're happy, Bobby. I don't think you will be happy if you keep going down this path. And I was like, I think I'm pretty happy. I've got a nice car. I've got you. I've got a really nice job. It's pretty cool. She's like, yeah, but that job bit, you should probably consider changing that. And at first I was like, no, I'm very happy, thank you very much. But as these kind of conversations, she ground me down, you could say, or maybe you could say she just helped me see the light. I genuinely believe it's the latter. She kind of just like was like, look, you say you like antiques, but really you spend all your time playing video games. And you,
there it is.
Yeah, and you love cars, right? So that's really your passion. You should go down and investigate, potentially making a living by either doing something to do with cars or doing something to do with video games. And I was like, yeah, that's a really good suggestion. That was like my eureka moment. It was, I owe a lot to my wife.
How long were you in the antique business before that conversation happened?
So I grew up with antiques around me. So it was kind of like, it was like throughout my life I was interacting with antiques but really like fully like even when I was a student, on the Saturday weekends I'd go to the local antique store market called Portobello Market in London. It's like probably one of the biggest antique markets in the world. And I used to go there every week with a friend of mine, and we'll have a stall and we'll sell antiques. And then I studied fine art valuation, and then after graduation I went into antiques. It was like interwoven with my life throughout, really. But definitely in my early life. But since joining games, really, I have ended up distancing from antiques quite a lot.
Right, so you don't really miss it too much?
Not really. I think I like art, I do, but the trade isn't really like something that I'm super passionate about. If I had all the money in the world, I would fill my house with garbage. I absolutely would.
Yeah, that's a problem I have right now. Is I have so much stuff and I have nowhere to put it. There's literally rooms in my house that have boxes of stuff that I just don't do anything with it. And I feel like I need to sort of get out of the kind of hoarder mindset that I'm in right now. So that's speaking to me a little bit in terms of what you would do if you had all the money in the world.
Absolutely right. And then a lot of gamers, I'm not saying all gamers are collectors, but they are definitely a subset of gamers, a category of gamers who are collectors. They just love to collect.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like they're doing it digitally through video games, but actually, inherently, they're collectors. And I think those collectors, a lot of them would love antiques because it's such a geeky niche thing that you can really get into. There's but it's just quite a, anyway. So that was like my past. I do still love antiques, but really, I think my wife was quite right. I think video games is absolutely like my ikigai, to use a Japanese word. Ikigai is a Japanese word, quite often used in business these days. It's quite a trendy word, I think, where it means like purpose of living, like my purpose to life. My ikigai is the current job that I do. I absolutely love it.
Cool. What games were you into before you actually started working in the business?
So I've played video games since I could remember, really. But like, I think as a child, when I was like quite young, like 5, 6 years old, and until like maybe just about double digiting, it was very much about the Famicom, the Nintendo, as it's called in the West. So all the Nintendo games, but the Famicom games, the Japanese, I'm half Japanese, so I grew up with Japanese video games. So those games I absolutely loved, like whether it be, I don't know, Mario or whatever. Like there's a lot that are famous over here, but there's a whole bunch that just didn't really make it over to the West, and there's some really good ones. So I kind of grew up with those, like really nostalgic games. And then it was a Super NES. So you could say early on I was like a Nintendo fanboy. Without even knowing it, I was. I interacted with Game Boy, the Nintendo, the Super NES. Those were like my early day consoles. And then I switched over to PlayStation, and I've been more of a PlayStation type gamer for quite a while. And then having joined the industry, I became more of a like PC Master Race type of gamer, where it became all about keyboard and mouse type games,
right?
And strategy games. And
that's interesting how you evolved. I've always been just like pure PlayStation. Like I played Nintendo for sure at other people's places, but I never bought like a Switch or a Wii or a 64 or anything. I've always just been like, I went over to a friend's house, played the PlayStation one time, and I was like, what have I been missing all my life when I was like 8 years old? So it's interesting how
so you
like,
never switch camps. Yeah.
But the how you sort of like different stages of your life sort of evolved as a video game player.
Yeah, absolutely. But then the thing, I think the Nintendo thing never left. I think because other than the GameCube and the 64, I think I've owned every Nintendo hardware.
Oh, wow.
But like PlayStation, I think I've just owned every single one of them, even like the Vitas and the PSPs and stuff.
Yeah, I think I own all of them except I have not gotten a PS5 yet. Waiting for the price to go down on that sucker a little bit.
That's going to go back up, I hear. It's going to go up even more, Graham. You need to get in there.
Oh, God, I need to get one now? Okay.
Yeah.
They're still like $500 or whatever it was.
I don't know what it is in the US, but yeah, I've seen the news that they're going to raise the price.
Oh, God.
Like, cost of living. And
okay,
stuff,
well, I guess I better like end this interview now, and I need to go buy a PS5. I got to get my priorities straight.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we got the sort of the motivational speech, the passion for games. So now you try to actually break into the industry. What's that like? What are the steps you take to do so?
So I didn't really know what I could do in games. And I didn't even know what kind of jobs were available in games. I just knew, like, from the conversation with my wife, it was like, oh my God, I could work there's an industry. There must be jobs, right? So then I started thinking, like, okay, what can I do? I'm good at project management. I'm good at running a business. I basically keep to like budgets and quality and schedules, so I could be a really good project manager. I was like, okay, maybe I could be a producer. I'd be a great producer. I convinced myself, that's it. I'm going to be a producer, right? Without really knowing anything about video games,
right?
In terms of the development side and the publishing side, had no idea. Like, if you ask me, what is an alpha milestone or a beta milestone? I don't know. Had no idea it even existed, right? And so, yeah, I just started looking for jobs to be a producer. And I looked up to people like Kojima and Miyamoto and all these like Japanese legends in the industry. And but I didn't really know what they did in their day-to-day lives. I didn't really know anything. But I was just like, yeah, I want to be like them. I want to be a producer. So I started looking, and then the jobs market was vibrant. It always is. The video games market is great like that. It's just dynamic, and there's always jobs available, which is all lovely. And the people that I were interacting with were like, yeah, like it sounds like you're an interesting character. You know, you currently run a few antique shops and stuff. But like, do you know anything about video games? Like how it's done? I'm like, I have not got a clue. Right? And literally, one of the interviewers asked me, "Do you know what alpha or beta is?" And I was like, "I have no idea." Like, okay, okay, you should probably do a little bit more kind of like research before you start applying to like manage projects which you have no idea how you're going to manage. And their recommendation to me was to start in QA. One of them recommended I start looking in QA, which is a really good entry-level position where you can just, it sounds like a dream job, play a game for 8 hours a day, and you get paid for it, and you test the games. So I was like, okay, I'll start looking into that. And when I started looking for QA jobs, I had a much better success rate, and I basically landed a job at, job offers from PlayStation and Rockstar, and also Nintendo offered me a job, but as a translator, like an internal business translator, not to do localization, but to just like help, kind of communicate with Nintendo Japan, and ultimately I ended up choosing the job at PlayStation to be a QA tester there, because it was in Liverpool, UK. So it still meant like 4 hours away from where I lived, so we had to relocate, and my wife was pregnant with our first child at the time. The other choice of Rockstar was in Lincoln, and she didn't want to move there. And Nintendo was in Frankfurt, Germany, and she was like, I don't even speak the language, so no way.
Well, that's big so too, right? So you're making this transition while your wife's pregnant, and you're getting into a business that you really don't know anything about at this point. I mean, that's got to be a little bit of a mind job.
Oh, it was. And it was like a huge downgrade in pay as well, right, compared to what I was on to what I ended up on, because QA is very much an entry-level job, and I was running quite a successful operation in antiques, right? So it took some getting used to. Like for the first year after transitioning to games, I was in the red every month because I was still living at the kind of like quality of life standards that I was used to, but my pay packet was not it was not that.
Right.
So it was like, yeah, we made the adjustment. And also having a kid comes with like costs that we didn't know how to deal with. So I think there were challenges for sure, but it was like the best decision I've made in my life.
What's that like getting acclimated initially? Like what was it like to work there? Not even just like once you get into the games, but just like the culture, the environment you're in, like getting acclimated. Was it like a reality check when you got in there? Like, oh God, I didn't expect it to be like this. Or was it like, okay, this is going to be difficult to learn, but I can do this. Like, what was your mindset like when you first, walked through the door?
Like when I first went through it was really welcoming. And I think every company that I have worked at since as well have always been super welcoming. I think generally speaking, the games industry is just amazing. It's so like on the cutting edge in terms of like D&I, like diversity and inclusiveness, and it's just all the warm fuzzy feeling stuff, right? It's got that locked down. Like everyone that's there is, generally speaking, like 99% of the people are there because you have something in common. You love video games, right? So it's just a really nice environment, and immediately you've got something to talk about with people. Whereas I think in a lot of other industries you just don't have that. So that kind of like togetherness and immediate acceptance was there and always has been, actually. And so it's a real blessing of the industry. It's really lovely.
Oh, cool. That's great. And so what was your first project you were assigned to do QA?
Yeah. So my first project I'll never forget is Heavy Rain. By Quantic Dreams. Yeah.
Yeah, so for those that don't know about Heavy Rain, it came out, I think, in 2010, February 2010. It was one of my favorite games at the time when it came out, because it was a very story-driven game. You play as, I think, 4 different people, all linked to a serial killer, sort of whodunit. You got like a detective, a journalist, a father who lost a son to the killer, who's called the Origami Killer. And then you play as one of the detectives actually on the case. And it's a good game. It's on PS3. I think they remastered it for PS4 as well. But it's a very different kind of game. Lots of different branching storylines based off your decisions that you make. I think there's like 20 different endings or something like that based off all the decisions you can possibly make. And I don't know, I really enjoy the game. It's a very unconventional game. It's a slow game. It's a lot of walking around, looking for clues, talking to people. So I must imagine, even though it was kind of like an interesting step forward for the industry, it was kind of like playing an interactive movie, but testing that day in and day out must have gotten very, very monotonous.
Yeah, you could say that. Absolutely. Like it was cutting edge, right? Like cutting edge technology, like the production values were just unbelievable. Like, there was nothing else like it in terms of just the quality of the voice acting, the motion capture, and just everything, right? The animations were great. The visuals
the writing
were great,
was
the lighting was great.
Yeah, the writing was really good overall, I thought too. Like, I mean, exactly. I got emotionally invested in all four of those characters. They did a really good job of developing them. And I just remember like watching the loading screens, right? It's just like a close up of someone's face or their eyes, and I was like, "Holy crap! Look at that!" I mean, this is unbelievable technology.
Absolutely, and the characters are like really believable, and like you say, you can really kind of like get emotionally invested in it. And the story was like really quite mature. It wasn't like a throwaway thing. It was like a really just meaty story. And even just early on in the story, I think there was like a scene where the one of the main guys, his son Jason, goes missing in the mall, and he's like looking for his son, and then there's like an accident, and with a car accident, and he's just like immediately the story just grabs you and you're in, right? You're just jacked in and you just can't put the thing down and you just want to keep playing.
Right.
As a gamer, it's amazing. As a tester, I would say interactive narrative games are the worst games to test, because you're on it 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and you're playing the same chapter like again and again.
Yeah.
And yes, there's variety. Absolutely there is. But there's only so many combinations of choices that you can make, right? Whereas a game like, I don't know, a fighting game or a racing game or a shooting game, there's like this skill involved. There's more potential things that could happen, and there's progression that you can make as an individual in terms of your skill. But in an interactive narrative game, it's like, all right, I'm going to watch the same scene again, and I'm going to then make this choice instead. Oh, I'm going to try and walk into this wall and pick up this thing and see if while I'm holding this thing and I do this action, if it does something else, right? So it's like it got quite tedious. It did, but there was a good bug. There was a really good bug that I found that the developer did waive. I'll talk about it if that's all right.
Yeah, no, I love to hear about it.
So there were like loads of bugs that I raised as a tester, and they were like just genuine like proper bugs. But there was this one bug. It got quashed. I think it's still in the game today, probably. But in the game, there's a character called Madison. She's one of the main characters that you can play with, and she's first introduced to the player as this kind of like really like just attractive, strong female, right? And in the scene that she's getting set up with to kind of introduce the character to the player at the very beginning when you start to get to know her. So she's being introduced and you're like, oh, she's like really attractive. And then she starts like taking off her clothes and she'll go and have a shower and stuff. And then for some reason, the developer also gave you a choice for her to use the toilet, right? And then, so she uses the toilet and there's a sound effect of her doing her business.
Right.
And then she just gets up and puts her clothes on without like cleaning herself.
I remember this.
I was like, this is wrong. Like,
yeah.
What? This is so like just breaking the whole thing. Like, at least make the noise of the toilet roll rolling or something, right?
Yeah, like you could cut to a different shot. You know,
or just not just her, just straight from doing her business to just putting her clothes back on. I was like, no woman would do that. This is wrong, isn't it? I don't know. I'm not a woman. Maybe that's what women do, but I highly doubt it. But,
no, you're exactly right. And I can kind of remember the scene. Yeah. So yeah, it was never addressed. It was still in the game. I remember it. So
because then I raised it, and then my QA lead at the time, who's now a producer at PlayStation, but he at the time was a QA lead, and he just laughed out loud when he saw the report that I sent through the system. It was called DevTrack, and it pinged over to him. He read it and he just started laughing, and then everyone was laughing in the office. And then he did actually put it through, and then the developer was like, "No, we're not fixing this."
Well, I imagine too, like,
the bug.
When did you start testing? Like, what phase of development was it when you started testing?
Oh, so normally QA starts around alpha or beta.
Right.
And with this game, we did a fair bit of QA. So this was in, I think I joined in April 2009. So it was already in test at that point. And
right.
I joined when they had already started testing. So I'm not sure when they started, but there was a fair bit of QA on that game.
Well, I bet one of the reasons why they didn't go back is probably because it could have been the actor's schedule. Slash, is it really that big of a thing that we have to like go get the motion actress back, do motion capture again, reshoot this, budgetary
completely.
Stuff?
Yeah, because there's priorities, right? You have to prioritize. So in QA, you have like class A bugs typically, which are like crash, hang bugs, where the game just terminates in a way that's just not acceptable, or it corrupts your save. Like that's just like terrible. So all the kind of really critical stuff are class A. So we absolutely focus on those. I think class B are more like, it doesn't hinder your ability to continue to play the game, but it's just so jarring that it really should be fixed kind of stuff. And then there's class C and below bugs, and this was like class C and below. This was like no, this is not really a bug. But I'm like, yeah, but it's yeah. Anyway, so
it's worth reporting though. I mean, I think that shows, especially from a tester, to go above and beyond there to report a factual inaccuracy to how someone would actually handle that situation.
But yeah, we had some fun times in QA. It's a great department to start your career within games in, because it gives you a really good insight into game development and how the whole thing works, right? But you only get to see like the tail end of things. You don't really get to see the beginning, which is very much where I'm at right now in my current role. But like, it gives you a really good sort of grounding, I think. So I have a lot of respect for people who started their games industry career in QA, because then I'm like, yeah, you've earned your stripes, dude. Like, yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about the QA process in terms of like how things are logged, how that all gets sort of combined and then sent to the developer, because obviously you're not in-house QA. You weren't actually in Quantic Dream. You were Sony, who's the publisher. So it's like, what is that process like, and then what's their feedback like to you, not just you personally, but your department? Can you take us through that process?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just cover like a bit of context as well beforehand. So there's always integrated QA within studios, which is usually a much smaller team, and then the publisher would usually have like an army of people testing games, right? And in integrated QA, if you're within the studio, you're kind of testing the game every day from really early on, like way before even alpha. You'll be testing the game every day and kind of giving like direct feedback to your team members within the game development studio, and then so they can see like, oh, okay, these are the kind of things that we absolutely need to fix. And quite often integrated QA will do more than just QA in terms of just bug tracking. They'll have a lot more of a insight into and an influence on the game balancing, and even to some degree like the design to some degree. Whereas if you're on the publishing side, there's different QA departments that specialize in different areas. So there's predominantly 4 different types of QA that happens on the publishing side. There's functionality QA, which is what I was doing, which is kind of like, does the game function as intended? So it's real functionality bugs, right? And then there's localization QA, where you're like a language tester. So maybe you speak fluent in Russian or Japanese or simplified Chinese, right? And you just focus on your language, and you're just testing that the language has been implemented correctly, and you don't log any other bug. You just log the language bugs. And if you find a really critical bug that's not a language bug, but maybe it's a functionality bug, then you'll talk to your functionality buddy at work, your colleague, and go, hey, I found this thing. You might want to check this out. And then the functionality tester will actually log those bugs. But as a language QA tester, you're kind of, I'll go back to functionality in a bit, but the language QA tester is just purely looking at things like, does the text get displayed correctly within the speech bubble, or is the correct line of that character being spoken at the right time? Because if the developer doesn't necessarily know all of these 10 different languages being implemented to the game. So they're just kind of implementing things systematically, but you actually need some human person to go in and play the game and just make sure it's been implemented correctly, right? Because someone could have provided the wrong string ID for a speech, kind of a line, a VO line, and then because the wrong ID has been provided on the WAV file, it's been implemented in the wrong place, say, for example. So there's language localization QA testers who just focus on language. I
bet that was fun for Heavy Rain.
Yeah, I'm sure. I think whichever department you're in, a game like Heavy Rain is, but at least there's a lot of lines and stuff for you to check.
I think the director said it was like a 750-page script or something insane. Like a normal movie script's 120 pages. So like imagine, that's nuts.
It is, because they have to write so many stories, so many of the variations of the same scene, so it ends up becoming massive, right?
Yeah.
And you need to make sure that the correct thing is happening depending on the combination of whatever it is that your choices that you made. So yeah, anyway. And so there's localization QA. Then there's two more. There's compliance QA and compatibility QA. So compliance QA is each platform holder, whether that be PlayStation, Nintendo, Microsoft, or whoever, will have their own sort of like key rules and guidelines that you have to abide by when you submit your game. Otherwise, they won't approve the game. So games that are like failing or crashing or hanging in a way that's not graceful, then that would definitely fail the first party guidelines. So you have to do compliance QA and check that it meets all the key requirements of that platform holder. So it could be things like on PlayStation, if you press the PS button, it's expected that a certain window would pop up, right? Mm-hmm. And if you press the share button on your controller, then a certain window should pop up and allow you to do certain functions. So that's specific to PlayStation. But if you're with Microsoft, then you have different buttons on your controller where specific things need to happen. And depending on what happens when you press the standby button, how long you press it, certain things should happen to the game, right? And how it handles the ending of the program needs to be done in a certain way. So there's all these rules and guidelines you need to abide by, which the compliance QA team are specialists in all of those rules, and they just test out all of those key items and make sure that the game's being handled in the right way.
Right. Well, especially finally, around the time when you started, right, is when we started to get all that stuff, right? Where it wasn't just, I turned the machine off or I hit the reset button and the disk tray pops out. It's like, no, you have this full contextual menu now you can really, you interact with. It's like absolutely inherent, important to the functionality of your experience as a player.
Absolutely. Yeah, there are things that people come to expect, right, in terms of the standard level of quality of how things should operate, depending on which platform they're on. And you need to make sure you're meeting those requirements. So compliance QA is quite a specialized team. You usually don't start in there. You usually start in functionality QA or localization QA. And then as you earn more experience and knowledge, then some people move into compliance QA because that's more of a specialist subject. And then the fourth and final kind of key major function of QA or department within QA is compatibility QA. And this is more specific to PC and mobile games, where you've got lots of different types of hardware that you need to make sure that your game accommodates. So this is usually with big kind of QA development service outfits, where companies that solely focus on QA will have these departments, where they'll just have loads of different desktops and laptops and desktops with different setups, different screens, different graphics cards, different CPUs and everything, right? And they'll be able to just test on a bunch of different combination of machines whether your game functions correctly and how well optimized it is. And that's quite often how a lot of publishers and developers determine what their actual minimum spec becomes, because there's always a target minimum and recommended spec early on in a project if it's planned properly, but that's not necessarily where you end up. And through compliance QA, you definitely get a benchmark of, okay, so it's actually these kind of machines that we can recommend and we can say is minimum, and it's these hardwares or these combinations where we're having issues with. Maybe it's specific chips by certain manufacturers or something where certain issues are happening. So then you can start getting those bug reports and debugging and fixing and making sure that your game can be enjoyed by as many people as possible. So there's like 4 major kind of key QA functionalities, of which I was in functionality, where I was kind of testing, does the game function properly?
So how long were you in QA for?
Not that long, actually. Well, technically the entire time that I was at PlayStation, I was in QA within it was called the Global First Party QA department. GFP QA was the department that I belonged, or the division that I belonged within. But I was a QA tester for like 3 months. And then I transitioned to become a support services translator, which was, I was basically translating for and interpreting all the communication between PlayStation Japan and PlayStation Europe and America. And there was like there were support service translators in Europe, America, and Japan. And we would just be around the clock, 24 hours a day, making sure that all the emails that involve Japanese PlayStation employees to work with non-Japanese PlayStation employees, or people who are working outside of Japan, right, who don't speak Japanese, so that they can communicate properly. So all the emails were being translated 24 hours a day. I think it probably still goes on today. And we'd translate or interpret all the meetings that were happening internally. And if there was like a big summit happening, and we did them a few times a year, then we'd be there to make sure that everything that was being said could be, there was good communication happening between all the relevant members of staff. So it was a really good job in terms of getting exposure to the business and speaking to lots of people. I ended up making a huge network of friends and who are now ex-colleagues but friends at the time through doing that role. So it was really, really good. But that is a very specialist role, right? You can only really get that job if you speak Japanese and English fluently. So it's not one that I can say to everyone, yeah, that's a great way to start off your industry career journey, because it's something that is probably quite hard to learn another language to that proficiency to be able to do that job properly. But it was a great job. Yeah, it was really, really good fun.
How'd that come about? Was that a thing where there was like a position open and you went for it, or did someone see, hey, this Bobby guy's doing a great job in QA, what else can he do, or how'd that come about? So
when I was first looking for the role, and I started looking for the QA role, like the guy that was heading up QA at the time, and I think he still heads up QA, is this guy called Dave Parkinson, who gave me my first role in the industry, so thank you, Dave. But he was like, look, you don't know anything about the business. You absolutely should learn QA, and it's quite right, go for it. You do your thing, but if all goes well, I'd like you to do this more translation thing anyway. So kind of I started in QA almost on the basis that if it goes well and if I do well, then he'll transition me over to this kind of support services translator role. So yeah, that's how it came about. So it didn't really exist as a role when I first joined. The role didn't exist, but Dave kindly made that role for me.
Okay,
within,
cool.
Yeah, PlayStation.
So when you were doing the global communication stuff, I mean, I think it's great that you got, your feet wet with QA, and then you sort of go into this new role. Then you actually get to learn about the business, right? And I feel like this probably sets you up for what you're doing now, and you get to make a bunch of contacts. Do you have any other specific stories from that time period that was really influential on your career?
So I learned to be diplomatic, and I learned to listen, because you have to listen to be able to translate what the person's saying. And the people that I was working with, because in PlayStation, the QA kind of main QA team is in Liverpool, UK, and they were really talented, super smart people there, and they still are, and they're still there. So some of them are still there. Some people have moved on, but some people are still there, and they're really good people. And I was working with them, and the support services translators who were in the US and in Japan really struggled to understand the Liverpool accent, right? They're called it's called Scouse. Mm-hmm. Like the accent is called Scouse, but they couldn't understand Scouse. So whenever there was a Liverpool kind of based person speaking on a call or in a meeting, it was just like, Bobby, you handle it. You just can't deal with it. And then sometimes the people were getting really emotional, like in any business, right? You really care and you're passionate, so you want to get your point across, and And, you know, sometimes the other person really isn't quite understanding what you're saying, and they don't really understand because they don't think like you. They have a totally different culture. So it was real bashing of characters sometimes. And sometimes people were just swearing and blinding. And then I couldn't say that directly. So I'd like really soften the blows and get the message across without having to be that passionate about it. And so it kind of like gave me a new skill set in a way.
Yeah, the mediator.
Because I'm quite an emotional being. I'm like really emotional. I have my serious ups and downs. And so, yeah, but by doing that, it kind of gave me a lot more stability as well, actually. I was, okay, this is... I'm like learning from other people's mistakes in a way, I guess.
Right.
It was really good.
Cool. And so from there, you do that you're at PlayStation overall for a couple of years, and then I know you transitioned to Sega, but was it a thing where it's like you got an opportunity? Did you just explore it and say, I want to move on, or did you meet somebody that got you the opportunity, or how did that come about?
So that was crucial in my career, that transition. Like a lot of people end up staying in QA because it's so much fun, and there's this real sense of camaraderie, and it's a totally valid choice, right? It's great. It's for those people, it's fantastic. For me though, I had that thing of I want to be a producer. I didn't even know what a producer did day to day. Even at that point, I didn't really know what a producer did day to day. But I still wanted to do it, so I wanted to. And there were conversations within PlayStation of, maybe Bobby can come to our team and be a producer in our team. But it never really came through. So I carried on looking for producer roles. And then Sega in London, which is where I'm born and bred, they had a vacancy for an associate producer. So I applied for that role. And that was like the beginning of a 10.5-year journey at Sega. And it's the best choice I ever made. Some of my friends at PlayStation at the time, when I was making that decision, like really pushed against. They advised me strongly not to do that. They were like, you're at PlayStation. This is like the best company in the world. And you're going to move away to London? Like, we love you. You should stay here. You've got a great career here. There's a great, and I was just like, yeah, but I want to be a producer. So I ended up taking that role. Some people just were super supportive. You get different people, right? Some people were like, yeah, this is great. Go and do your thing, Bobby. Do your producer thing. Follow your dream. So there were like different conversations that happened when I made that choice. But I think it was the right choice. And so I joined Sega off the back of, I think it was 3 or 4 interviews that I did with Sega on a telephone. I think there was one interview in person. And I started as an associate producer. And my first game there was Sonic Generations, which to this day I think is the best Sonic game in modern history.
Yeah,
personally.
Agreed.
But I might be a little bit biased.
No, I would agree with that. I'd say since probably the third one, it was the best. I'd say so. I mean, that's great that you're able to be involved in a game that I think was universally beloved by Sonic fans. I can't speak for all of them, but I'm friends with a very good one who's always forced me to play all these really bad modern Sonic games, and then he's like, "This is the one. I'm telling you, they got it back. They got the mojo back." So that's really cool. You're able to work on that. But your role, right, as a producer, you weren't necessarily hands on with the developers. You were still on sort of the business, the publishing side, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So I was a publishing producer, and when I first joined, I was an associate producer. And within the first 2 years of being at Sega, I went from associate producer to full producer. So Sega moved me along my career super quickly. It was an amazing time at Sega. I've got not a bad word to say about Sega. It's a really good company. All the companies, I've been blessed, right? And like you say, having worked on such a iconic IP and a great project as my first project to be assigned on, it was just oh my god, this is amazing, right? It was amazing. And so as a publishing producer, my role, I wasn't embedded in the studio. The studio was the Sonic team in Japan, Tokyo, and I'm based in London, right, in Brentford, UK. And my role was really kind of focus more on the localization of the game into all the European languages, the English, French, Italian, German, Spanish kind of stuff. And this was also the first Sonic game where it had all the voiceover in all those languages. So that was super cool. It was such a cool project in that respect. Actually, if it's all right, I'll dwell on this a little bit.
Oh, please.
It was
so
cool. because like Sonic's got such a rich history, right? It started off obviously in video games, but then it went into animation. There was like the Sonic X animation series, and since there's like Sonic Boom and there's the Sonic movies and everything. It's like a truly kind of like multi media IP. It's like it's a fantastic IP. My children love Sonic. You know, it's just spans generations. It's amazing. It's so popular still. It is such a great IP. Anyway, and then because of the history that it has had, when we talked about doing the voiceover into all the European languages, and it makes sense, right, to do all the voiceover into all these languages, because predominantly, a lot of your gamers are going to be children, and a lot of children haven't learned how to read yet. So to make the game accessible, having the voiceover means they can just listen to the cutscenes and be like, oh, I can follow the story and I know what's going on, rather than just skipping over all the text that they can't really understand.
Whose decision was that?
That was the main producer. It was Iizuka-san, who still is the Mr. Sonic guy. Takashi Iizuka is like he's like super cool dude, and I consider him like a BFF. Like we're like proper buddies. I love the guy and respect the guy so much. But he and I just saw him at Gamescom the other day, and so we're gonna meet up again when we're at Tokyo Game Show next week. But Iizuka-san, it was his decision. He was like, look, this is a big call for us to do this, because then it means if we're going to do this, we should continue to do this if it works really well, because it seems like the right thing to do for the franchise, right? And so how do we select the actors? Who should do the voiceover? And it was like, all right, well, where it makes sense, we'd very much love to use the same actors that we use for the animated series Sonic X. So for certain languages where we were able to get all the actors who already did the voice for Sonic, or Amy, or whoever the character is, we'll try and get the same actors, so that people who had followed the animated series, when they hear the voices in the game, would be like, that's the right voice. I've known that voice. And maybe they don't even make that connection kind of consciously, but subconsciously they feel like, this is right. It's the right voice for that character. So then me and Iizuka-san went on a tour around Europe together. We went to France, Paris, Barcelona, Spain, and I think it was Milan, Italy, and where was it in Germany? I think it was like Munich or something in Germany. And we went to all these places like around Europe, recording all the voices. And so the two of us spent like from breakfast through to dinner, like all throughout the day and weeks for like 3 weeks. It was like super intensive getting to know each other over the weekend and everything, because it was just the two of us, right, going around the place doing all these recordings at the relevant voiceover studios. It was an amazing experience. I'll never forget it. I'll cherish those memories. It was really cool. But yeah, I was on the publishing side. Sorry, Graham, I totally went off.
No, that's I love that you did that. Sonic Generations was a celebration of that franchise. So to go all out and say, not only is it going to be, a celebration gameplay wise, but character wise, and really put the effort there, I think it was appreciated by the fans for sure. Totally.
You're so on point with the word celebration as well, because it was the 20th anniversary of Sonic at the time as well. So it was a real celebration of the IP. It was an amazing project. So yeah, localization was key. Obviously QA, looking after the QA was key, and did a lot of feedback to the studio about the design of the game as well. But like they largely nailed it anyway. But it was just like there's always like small points of improvements, right? So then was giving them feedback on specific things that were happening in the game. I didn't really touch the story as such, but it was more like how some of the design was and how certain things were working, to just really kind of just tweak and polish a little bit. But like the Sonic team is so talented. Like they were largely on point with most things anyway. But yeah, it was amazing.
So what was that like when you're giving feedback to the studio in terms of the design? Was it like around levels, mechanics, all the above?
Exactly. Yeah, it could be about anything. It was anything and anything that just stood out, that just seemed a bit off. We'd give feedback on, and we'd do the feedback sometimes over meetings. Sometimes, quite often, there'll be a tracker that we'd use, and we'll just go through the tracker and go, this item that we raised however many weeks ago, it doesn't really matter, but we've raised it, and you said this, And since then, the build has come in, and now the game is doing this, but maybe it's not quite right, or yeah, it's totally on point. Let's now forget about that and move on to the next thing. Or maybe it's like it's not been implemented yet. We need to make sure we review this point at the next build or the next key milestone when it's planned to be addressed, sort of thing. And it'll be an ongoing conversation, right, around that tracker. And and they were like super receptive. Everyone wants the game to be as good quality as possible, right? In every sense of that word. So everyone's like totally behind it. Sometimes if there was a feedback that was totally off, it would almost offend people. Be like, what? Do you not even understand this project? Like, why? Why are you even saying that? Do you not see the big picture? You know, because everyone's passionate, right? It's lovely. But yeah, it was a great kind of process. That whole feedback loop is really nice.
Gotcha. So the game comes out. I remember it being very successful in terms of fan reception. I think it sold well from what I remember. So what was that like when you're back at Sega? And I imagine there's a ton of pressure on this project considering kind of where the franchise was at that point. Like I remember Sonic and the Black Knight not being very good. Parts of Sonic Unleashed were good. The daytime levels were great, but it's like I haven't had like a great Sonic game in so long. And then this game hits and it sort of does everything right that you would want from a Sonic game. So I can't imagine what it was like for Sonic Team, but for you to be involved in that, I mean,
yeah, it was amazing.
Like, how validating was that?
Oh, it was fantastic because it was. You're right. There was a few misses, you could say, and then for this one, for the 20th anniversary, we really wanted to make sure this was like a proper celebration and it was well received and it had all the kind of Easter eggs and fan service stuff as well as like all the familiar things and nostalgic things, but also some new, really cool gimmicks in there, right? So it certainly wasn't a project that no one cared about. It was a project that everyone cared about, and we wanted to make sure it was delivered well. So it was, when it came out to the kind of success that it did and received as well as it was really validating. It was lovely, actually. And you just know that millions of people, literally millions of people are playing it, right? And it's really that's like the kind of, it's intangible but in a way tangible when you hear stories from people. Like there is to this day a really big Sonic community, like hardcore ardent fans of Sonic, and they'd create an event called Summer of Sonic in London, like a physical event, and they'll also do another one in America and blah blah. But like it's like those shows that you kind of really get to directly speak to and interact with the fans of Sonic, and it was like, wow. It was amazing. I didn't know it until I went along to it.
You're at Sega for a while. So what's next after Generations?
So within Sega, I had like 3 key phases of a kind of career there. So initially it was in production for the first 2 years. And then there was like a period where I was in the business planning team where I was a publishing manager. And before I move on to publishing, just very briefly on production. So on production, and I kind of mentioned it earlier, but I kind of got accelerated, into like a senior producer kind of position there. And so by the end of my time within production, I was looking after a team of producers and like directly managing a couple of projects, but really I was kind of managing the team, right? Who each team member, each producer or associate producer or whatever, they would have their maybe 2 or 3 projects assigned to themselves, and then I would just be making sure that they were prioritizing the right projects and the right tasks for those projects, and that the right allocation of time is being spent correctly. Where there's troubled projects, that there's more time being spent on it or whatever, or maybe giving them extra support where needed so I can take some weight off them wherever needed. So it became like people management, process management, as well as managing a couple of projects that I had. And so during that time, there was like a whole bunch of projects that we went through. But and there were some really iconic ones. But I think for me, there's a game that like no one's probably heard of, called Rhythm Thief, but that was like I think it was like a 3DS exclusive, very Japanese game, and it's a rhythm-based game with a narrative in between the rhythm games that you do. It's a little bit like Professor Layton, but instead of doing puzzles, you're doing rhythm games. So the kind of setup is you go along the map and then you interact with various characters and you find out what's happening in the world, and there's like a a bit of a kind of like, whodunit sort of element, and you're trying to find out stuff. In this case, you're the thief and you're stealing stuff, but there's other stuff going on in the world. And then in between, you've got all these kind of unique rhythm games that you're having to do. So each rhythm game, generally speaking, it was quite different, and there was a lot of variety of gameplay. So that was like a really lovely project that no one has heard of, that I love, that I think all industry people probably have. Like, oh, I worked on this game. It was amazing. It was so much fun. No one's heard of it, but it was amazing, right? So for me, during production, my thing was Rhythm Thief. And then after that, I worked in the business planning team as a publishing manager. And that was a role where I was focused on our internal greenlight process and kind of longer term strategy and roadmap setting, like helping our studios create their mid to long term plans. And for me, I moved into that role from production because I loved production, and being a producer was great. And I could see myself doing that for the rest of my life. Genuinely, it is a fantastic role to have like direct kind of input and influence on a game. It is lovely. But I wanted to know more about the business. And to understand that, this was the perfect role, right? Because then I understand how games are approved, like why there's decisions being made, like why is this game being started up anyway? Like quite often as a producer, you don't know. You're not at the very, very beginning of the funnel, right? So you don't really know why did this game get the go-ahead, and then why did that game get cancelled, whereas this game continued. Like sometimes it's not really clear as a producer what's behind those decisions. Quite like 9 out of 10 times you do know, but there are the occasional occasions where you don't know, and I wanted to know everything, right? So I was like, I want to know the entire process, the value chain from beginning to end. So by doing the publishing manager role, I was managing the kind of internal greenlight process. So I was in all of those key decision-making meetings about a project from the very beginning all the way through to the end and beyond as well. Like, do we continue to support the game with ongoing content or not? So like, that was like the kind of knowledge, the exposure to the knowledge that I was really yearning, I think, in terms of like understanding the business end of things. And Sega Europe had has to this day, multiple studios, whether it be Creative Assembly, making Total War, or Relic Entertainment, making Company Heroes. They've got multiple studios working on fantastic IP. And those studios were, when I first started that role, their mid to long-term plan wasn't really clearly communicated to the business. So it was causing problems. So we were working, my role was to work really closely with the studios to ensure that not only that each of their projects are being approved as and when needed, but also that they were effectively able to communicate their longer term plans to the business so that when they do bring their projects along, the business is aware, oh, this is how this fits into your overall big picture of how you're going to dominate the world with your IP, right?
Right.
Because that's what you want. You want your IP to grow, and you want more and more people to engage with your IP, right? And have a really vibrant community. So if the business understands the bigger picture well, then it becomes a much easier conversation as to, oh, this is why this falls into the tactic of your strategy of what you're trying to deliver on. Mm-hmm. So that was like a really nice kind of like period of understanding how the business worked. But then I was like, I don't really engage with the games anymore. I was so far away from the games. I wasn't. But I have a question real quick for that though. Like, how do you figure out those long-term plans? Because it sounds to me like that's kind of got to be a little bit of a waterfall process, right? In terms of figuring out those plans in order to make that work, or is that more of like I hate to use like project management terms like agile and waterfall, but it seems like to have that long-term plan, you have to be able to really have it, and then it has to be malleable though, right? Yeah. So to create the plan, you have to start at the really core of something that you believe in that will not change over the next 10, 20 years, right? As a team, as an organization. So we start there in terms of something that's not changeable, this is my mission statement, my values and my mission statement. So you kind of start at the core of things that won't change over time. And then you kind of add around it like rings of an onion, you just keep adding the stuff. And the further out you go, the more shorter term that statement or thing, that goal that you're trying to deliver on becomes. And it becomes more tactical rather than conceptual. So you start with like values and mission, and then you become more like strategy, and then you become more like tactics, or there's goals before strategy, and then strategy, then tactics. And then within the tactics, you then have like projects and tasks and stuff. So it really...
Right. So each layer of the onion informs the next until it boils down to like the absolute thing that you have to do kind of deal.
Exactly.
And how long does that take to sort of like get that plan figured out with a team?
It totally depends.
Yeah.
It depends on the team. Some teams really had a really clear idea of what they were doing already, and then it was just about formulating it and communicating it in an effective way. And some teams really just were like, yeah, this is not how we've operated.
Right.
We've kind of just focused, on making a great game, and we just keep doing it, right? Mm-hmm. So like for those teams, it took longer. I'm not going to mention any names, but it was like... It was an interesting process. So it was different for everyone. It's like how long is a piece of string, right? So it was different. But we would have regular communication, and then even once a team delivers on that overall kind of mid to long term plan, every year we update it anyway. It should be. And if it's not updated, we should explain why it's not being updated, right? So it's kind of like there should be a regular touch point with the business on that big picture.
Yeah, I can imagine you have this plan. Then it could be easy though, right, to let it slip away unless you're really staying on it, not just from your end, but from the studios or the developers end as well.
Absolutely.
Oh, cool. And then you were saying after that you wanted to you missed working with teams more on the actual kind of development process, or am I misquoting you there?
Exactly. Yeah. No, you're quite right. So I felt quite distant from games, and and I was talking to my family and friends about it, and I was like, look, I love what I do, it is great, but I feel like I miss being involved and talking to people who are actually making the games, right? I was just like in management at that point. And then quite a lot of the people around me were like, yeah, but Bobby, it doesn't matter what industry you're in, as your career progresses, you're going to become further and further away from the product. That's just only the nature of things. And I was like, yeah, but I still miss it, and I'm not going to accept it, right? And then there was this conversation going on internally within the company at the time of creating this new team, a team that was going to become the kind of incubation vehicle, like a investment platform, to a team that's going to create new IP and new franchises. And so I was like, I am so up for that. That sounds exactly what I'm after. And that was like my phase 3, my final phase within Sega, where I became a game scout. And I was just like, my job became to travel the world, talk to developers, and look for the next big hit that we can get behind. So my job became to, literally, I'll go to GDC, E3, Gamescom, PAX, all the shows that everyone's ever heard of. I'd be like on the road, living out of a suitcase. So for some people, it's not going to be their dream job because you're constantly on the road. But for me, it was like, I love traveling, I love eating, I love talking to people, and I love video games. This is perfect, right? And I have some kind of entrepreneurial spirit within me, where I want the business side of things to work, the commercial side of things to work. So, talking contracts and talking numbers and all of that stuff, I'm like, yeah, I'm down with that. I'm totally fine with it. So it's like the perfect role for me. And that is my ikigai, which I was talking to earlier. It's really like this is it. And so it's like full circle. I was an antique dealer evaluating art, and my purpose was to make money out of doing it. And now it's kind of like the same thing where I'm evaluating art, because I view video games as art. But at the same time, I need to make sure that this generates money, and for everyone, not just the publisher, but also the developer, so that we can continue to have a really good, healthy working relationship. And because otherwise we all lose our jobs, right? So ultimately, it is a business. We do need to pay the bills. We all have family and commitments. So there is that element. But really, I get to travel around talking to people about video games and get really passionate behind something and try and get momentum behind it within the business to then get the green light, which I knew intimately, right? The process. So it was like the perfect role for me. Now I'm at a company called Curve Games. My official role right now is VP of Partnerships, and my role my role is to go out and find great games and sign these great games and ensure that the business knows what's required in terms of resources from the publishing end to ensure that we create an environment where the game could be as successful as it can be. So before I bring it to the table, I need to make sure I assess that the game is great, that the concept is really cool, and that the team is credible and can deliver on it, and that there's a long-term kind of thing that we can really get behind, because we don't want to do just opportunistic stuff. We want to do like long-term relationships. And also I want to make sure that when we bring it to green light, that I have a really viable plan that the business can go, right, if we invest in those things, we can make sure we have the time, budget, and people to deliver this successfully, right? So we don't just go cheap on stuff. We make sure we've got the right people and the right budgets for like marketing budgets and all of those things behind the game, so that when it comes out, people have heard about it and that they can continue to enjoy the game beyond the initial release of the game. We don't want to release games and just like kind of fire and forget them. We want to release games and then continue to support them beyond the initial release. So there's got to be that kind of longer term thing too. So like literally I travel 4 corners of the earth. Like this year, I by the end of this year, I would have been to South Africa. I would have been to the most southern point of the world, I guess. I would have been to like, I've already been, but I will go again to the Arctic Circle, so like really kind of northern tip. And I was in Japan a month ago, and I'll be going again like next week for TGS. So that's like the most eastern part of the world. And I'm normally based in Europe, and I travel around Europe all the time. And then and I've already been to GDC, so that's like the west coast of America, right? So it's like literally, I go to the 4 corners of the earth. I jokingly say, I am like the digital Indiana Jones, traveling the world, finding like the great treasures, right? And making sure that, that people can really enjoy it, and that we provide the team and enable and facilitate the developers that we work with everything they need to be able to just realize what they have envisioned.
Right. So it sounds like the primary way to go out and find the games you're looking for is to go to these big shows, your TGSs, your GDCs, et cetera. But is there any other way that like developers reach out to you or your company? Are there like pitches that happen that way as well, or presentations of their games that they're working on? Or is it just strictly, we're hitting these exhibitions, we're hitting the show floors, we're looking, and then we're going to scout out who we want? But can it work the other way around?
Oh, totally. Absolutely, Graham. So like, me traveling around the place and my team members going around the place is just one of the funnels, right? One of the funnel types. So the other kind of types of funnel that we have are like where people can just submit their game pitch through our website, curvegames.com. You can just go there and then find, like, submit my game here kind of thing, and then you can submit your game that way, like videos, links to your videos and presentations and all your details. You can log it all in, and then it automatically goes into our CRM tool, and then we review it on a weekly basis, and we just make sure that anything that's great, we just dig our teeth into.
Right.
And then there's also like recommendations from friends and like colleagues or industry kind of peers will recommend games all the time. So we'll look at those. We also actively look online, whether that be Twitter or Steam Next Fest or Reddit or whatever, right? We're kind of on the hunt physically and digitally, proactively. Right. And sometimes we'll just do like desk research. We'll just be like, right, this genre of game we're excited by. Let's find the best game in that genre that we can get behind, right? And there's just proactively just reach out to people. Or sometimes developers just reach out to me directly on LinkedIn or whatever and be like, hey, Bobby, do you want to see my game? And then, we'll start talking that way. There's also like game agents. I don't know if people are aware, but there's actually agents that represent developers whose job is to secure publishing deals and investments for studios. So I always talk to all the agents as well, the major agents I talk to. And if you're a developer, definitely consider having an agent. Talk to a few of them before you sign up with one, so that you kind of know what you're getting your teeth into. Like with anything in life, right? You should always get like 3 quotes for your window or bathroom door, whatever it is that you're looking to replace. Like, get multiple quotes before you jump in.
Yeah. No, it sounds like you're covering your bases really well, and you're open to getting submissions, which is great. It sounds very similar to indie film or just film in general when people are trying to shop their films around, which I do as kind of a side thing. But, a lot of the times when you're pitching to studios or distribution places that are going to put your film on streaming sites and things like that, it's like, it can become like a very rigorous process in order to actually like reach those people. So the fact that you guys actually have on your site, pitch us your game, is just breaking down barriers. That sounds fantastic.
Yeah, like just to kind of give you an idea, right? Let me just have a quick look. All right, so since October, November last year, around that kind of period last year to today, so it's like not even quite a year yet, but getting close to a year, like maybe we're like 10 months in or something, we've had 850 or so submissions through our website alone. So going to the shows and, kind of standing on the street corners, kind of just trying to court people and developers with great games is definitely a huge kind of funnel for me. And speaking to agents and recommendations, all of that's massive as well. But even just like people just putting putting stuff through our website is considerable, right? So yeah, it's I would always recommend reaching out to people directly,
right,
in whatever way you can. And the more personal you can be, the better. Rather than just like, just kind of just hoping on a prayer and tweeting something and hoping someone will pick it up and suddenly a deal lands on your lap. It's not quite how it happens. In most cases, you have to kind of, beat the streets and get in there and create connections and get investment that way.
Yeah, and I think that's something that is lost on folks, unfortunately, a little bit, is that you have to have a personal relationship with whoever you're doing business with. It can't just be like, I made this, you should want it because it's great. And that might be true. It might be great. But if you're, kind of a prick or something, then that's not going to work, right? With a business relationship. So yeah, I think the personal side of it is I would say it's more important than the actual. You have to have something good. But if you're going about it in a way that's arrogant or a way where you're not willing to work together and be collaborative, and what's the point, right?
I couldn't agree more, Graham. Right, your experience that you just mentioned about the film industry stuff is probably genuinely. I think it's really similar. I think there's a lot of similarities. Not that I've kind of done exactly what you do, but I would have thought there's lots of parallels. And you're right. Just because a game is great, that alone wouldn't really cut it, especially if you're acting in an inappropriate way, right? And you're being rude and arrogant and blah, blah, blah. Then it's like, well, for a publisher like we are, where we want a long-term relationship with a studio, we're not in business dealings, like negotiations, they talk about like blue table and red table. And one table is where you just kind of like, you're in a market and you're buying fruit and you'll never see that market stall again. You're just going to try and haggle for the best price possible. And on the other table, it's actually like your regular local grocery store. You're not going to haggle them and be really rude. You're going to try and strike up a really good relationship with your local dealer, right? Your local kind of shop person. So it's kind of like that ongoing relationship is what we're really looking for. And so we want to make sure that we're working on games that we love and with developers that we respect and like, right? So it's because otherwise we'll just be like, quite often game development takes 2 years or more, depending on how big the project is. And you don't want that kind of 2 years or more of your life being a really horrible experience working with someone that's really horrible. So you want to make sure that you guys have a cultural fit and to use a horrible word, like a synergy, of like, yeah, we get on, right? We kind of gotta, kind of get like, because there's going to be a feedback loop naturally. And, it's fine. It's fine that you don't listen to our feedback. That's fine. Like genuinely, it's fine. But how that process is, it's quite subjective, right? Anything with art is subjective. There's no right or wrong. So you want that experience to be a good ongoing conversation where it's a pleasant experience. It just has one aspect of an example, but anyway.
So I know we've been talking for a while, but I have a few more questions if you have time.
Sure.
I think, so what I'm interested in is like when you're getting a pitch through your site, or you are able to meet someone in person over Zoom or something, not in a show floor kind of deal. What are you looking for in a pitch to be like, that makes me want a green light? I know we kind of talked about some things just as a general overview of specific things you're looking for, but like specifically when someone's pitching to you, what are you looking for? What are some things you shouldn't do? Just for some folks who might be listening who are developers who are trying to get their games published.
Absolutely, yeah, sure thing. So since joining Curve, I think I've signed 12 games, and I've got 2 more games that I'm doing like contract negotiations for. And I'm going to bring more games to the table, right? And try and get more games signed by Curve. And so we are actively looking for content, and we're always going to be hungry for more talented developers to work with. And what we're really looking for when someone submits a game, I really need to understand what the game is. Like it's an obvious thing, but I need to understand what the game is. That does not mean I need to understand the backstory of all the characters and the intricacies of the lore. That doesn't really tell me about the game. That just tells me about your story, right? And the universe that you're creating. I need to understand what the game is, like the mechanics of it, the feature set, the content, the scale of the game, like how long is the experience and how varied is the experience, what kind of replayability features and elements do you have? Like, why would someone continue to play the game beyond the end of the game if there is an end to the game? So I need to understand what the game is. I would like to understand the lore and the characters a little bit, but not that much. Like, I don't need that, like a whole big thing for that. Like, when you first approach a publisher, not just me, like I speak to quite a few scouts and I have, like a pretty wide network. So I speak to a lot of people, and quite common amongst all of the scouts is we're looking through a lot of content in a single year. We get through a lot of game pitches, and we want to get through those game pitches effectively and be able to give developers feedback really quickly, whether it's a yes or no, right? And to be able to do that effectively, we want like a quick kind of rundown to just see if there is a fit for us as a publisher. Is this the type of content that we're really looking for? And then beyond that, if the conversation continues, then we want to dig deeper and really understand all the intricacies about the game, the characters, the lore, and everything. So at first, I would highly recommend going in with like a short version. I wouldn't necessarily say a one-pager, but like something quite like concise to show off what your game is in essence. Maybe like 5 to 10 slides specifically about the game, and then I would have another like 2 or 3 slides about the studio. You could talk about the origin story of the studio, the key team members in the studio, why you talk about the studio is why we should believe you can deliver this game like with any sort of credibility. Why would you be the best team in the world to deliver this game is ultimately what you're trying to say in that section of this is a team, this is a studio. And then beyond that, it'll be really good to have a section within the pitch deck on the market, the external environment, like how big is this market and where do you fit in terms of your positioning within the marketplace. So if you've got a whole bunch of racing games, say, racing games are really hard to do as an indie to, deliver a commercially successful project. But I'll just pick on that for a moment because I love racing games. But is your game like a simulation game, or is it more of an arcadey game? And is it like, in terms of its look, is it like a really realistic looking game, or is it like a stylized game? And within those 4 different quadrants, how does your game fit amongst the other major players out there? And where do you feel your game would deliver on in terms of commercial performance versus the others? And that is a slide that's like a really tricky slide in terms of how you deliver that. My recommendation in terms of doing the numbers slide is try and gather as much data as possible from the internet. There's a lot out there. I know it's an opaque industry, but there are numbers out there in terms of announcements of, hey, we've now reached X many million downloads or sales or whatever, right? So then you can just kind of just do like a simple table, and the columns would be things like title of the game, the publisher of the game, the studio of the game, the quality delivery of the game. Maybe it's a Metacritic score, Steam user score or something, right? And then maybe you can also have like the number of sales units that the game delivered that you're aware of. Maybe you can use Steam Spy or something, who knows. And then just line up all of the benchmark titles and then put the name of your game in the middle of that table and see what it looks like. And then versus your development cost, is that profitable, right? So if the game in the mid-table, because you don't want to aim for the, like, Wild Game's going to definitely do, like, it's going to be the number 1 game of the genre. Like, obviously, we all aim for that, but you can't plan for that, right? You should plan for, like, something reasonable and achievable. So put yourself in the middle, and then be like, all right, if I'm in the middle, and let's say it makes $10 million, right, of revenue by being in a mid-table, and your game is $5 million to deliver on, then whatever the cost to market it and publish it will probably soak up most of the remaining 5 million profit, and then you have to share the rest of whatever's left between you and the publisher. So is that really a worthy exercise? It starts to become it's quite tricky to make money out of that exercise, right? So you want it to be a bigger gap, really, ideally, where you can say, look, our game is only like a few 100,000 to make, and the revenue potential of this is here, it's like millions. This is going to make like so much money. Like we should totally do it together. But you don't expressly say how many units you're going to sell. You just put yourself in the middle of the table and let the publisher kind of go, oh yeah, this looks quite good, right? It's the way I would do it. That's my recommendation. And then
that all makes sense. I was going to ask before you broke that down, like the financial stuff. I think is also really important to have as a developer. How are you going to make the publisher money? And then comparing yourself to other titles that are in your genre that have been recently released, looking at their performance, being like, can we hope to match that? It also just shows, I think, that as a developer, you have a knowledge of the marketplace, right? So
Absolutely.
I mean that all makes sense.
Completely.
And then when you're going to the show floor, right? So you're going to TGS next week. What are you looking for? What's your process like when you're evaluating booths?
Sure. So like before I go to an exhibition or game conference, I always log into like an online kind of meeting matching sort of tool platform thing that they always have. And so I'll be scheduling in all my meetings before I even attend the show floor. And so make sure that if you are attending a conference or you're going to have a booth, there's probably an online meet to match, some kind of service out there that's being used by that game organizer, that conference organizer. So populate your profile fully. Definitely upload links, like include links to your pitch deck and links to your game videos. And for your game videos, make sure they're no longer than like 2 minutes long, I would say. Like keep them short and concise rather than having like an hour-long gameplay YouTube video that just runs and runs forever. Believe me, a lot of people do it and it's not the right way to do it. So have a short video and your pitch deck within your profile. So then when people like me are going through the attendees of the event, I can just go, oh look at that. That's the pitch. I'll have a look, and if it's a match, I will request a meeting, right? Proactively.
Right.
If you don't, I will not request a meeting with you because who knows what you're there for? I don't have a clue. Like, why would I request a meeting, right? And then if you're requesting a meeting to someone like a publisher, like myself, then I would make sure that when you send a meeting invite, you include a link to your pitch deck and video within the invite so that I can just go, okay, here's a meeting request, and I can have a look and see if it's something I should accept or not. Because I'll never accept a meeting unless I know what it's about and if it's something that's worth my time. I'm only at the show floor for 2 days or 3 days. Like each meeting slot is really precious to me, right? So I shouldn't just waste it on a kind of spontaneous, my gut says the name of this studio sounds cool, I'll accept the meeting. It's not how it works. So make sure you customize your meeting invitation when you send it on the meeting tool. And then on the day of the conferences, I always tend to keep like a slot, like maybe a morning or an afternoon for me to just wander the show floor and just see what's out there. So like if it's possible, be on your booth or have someone manning your booth. Quite often I end up at booth and there's a cool game, but there's no one there, and I'll just leave my card on the table in hopes that the person picks it up and emails me. But without making that personal connection, it's really like the success rate's really low, right? So make sure your booth is
manned. It's nice of you to even do that.
Yeah, right. It's if it's a cool game, it's in my interest to talk to the person, right? So,
Right.
Yeah. And then, so try and be at the booth or have someone manning the booth at all times. Like, obvious thing, but definitely well worth it. And then when you're at the booth, like before you go to the show floor and you're preparing your build, I would make sure that you have certain functions to your build, right? So you want to be able to have like debug commands to be able to unlock everything and just see everything rather than making the person, whoever it is that's looking at the game, to grind through for the next half an hour or the hour because they might not have that time. They might only have 5 to 10 minutes. So then being able to quickly show, hey, look, this is like the really cool stuff here, is a really cool way of doing it. And maybe that's also jump into specific levels, or maybe that's like a quick way to just end the program without saving it and just restarting fresh, like just little simple tricks to just be able to quickly show off the content that you've brought with you are definitely a bonus on a show floor.
Yeah, I think that last bit of information is really important. Like I remember when we went to GDC this year, we were talking to a bunch of folks and it was like every single one, you had to play through the game for a while to get it. And they were talking to you while you're playing the game, which is fine. Or some people would just sort of let you play. But there were times when it's like, I just kind of want to learn about the game and just look at something as opposed to playing it. I do want to play it, but I also, it's like, here's a controller. Go do something. It's like, I don't know what I'm getting into, So yeah, I think that's really good advice. So yeah, Bobby, I think think that brings us to the end here. Thank you so much for stopping by and talking to us today. Please promote your company and where people can find you.
Cool. Thank you, Graham. Thank you for having me, and thank you for organising this, Chloe. It's been a pleasure. Hopefully, there was some nuggets of information there that was useful or entertaining.
This is a big, juicy sandwich. There are no nuggets. Everything's great.
Thank you very much. Thank you. But yeah, I think I talked about Curve. Like, I did a cheeky plug in the middle of the thing. So
you did, but just to refresh.
All right. So just to refresh, Curve Games, just to talk about Curve Games a little bit. So Curve Games is a company. It started in 2005. It started as a developer, so we understand development, having that in our DNA. Then we started doing ports for other developers rather than just doing our own games. And then we started to publish those ports, and it was like, oh, why don't we just publish games, right? So we kind of evolved as a company over the years. And now we're like a fully fledged publisher, 80 people or so, based in the UK predominantly, and we focus on PC console games. The biggest game we've released in terms of commercial performance is Human Fall Flat, and that's done like over 40 million downloads now, and it continues to grow strong. It's been out for a few years. We continue to add content to the game. It's really community driven. It's a lovely, fun game to get your teeth into. It's kind of everyone's second favorite game kind of game. So if you've seen it and not played it, I'd recommend getting involved. You might just have a lot of fun playing it. It's child friendly too. And then last year, our biggest game was The Ascent, which is like a really great 1 to 4 player ARPG, super high visual fidelity, especially considering it's delivered by a small team of 12 people. So we do like really nice indie kind of PC console games, premium with ongoing content. Like it's just, we want to make sure that we continue to deliver really meaningful, relevant content to the communities that we create. And what I keep talking about this, but we're looking to create like long-term, super successful franchises, right? So if you've got a game that you've got a vision for, like especially a longer-term vision for, definitely I'd be all ears. Please submit your game through our website or reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever.
Well, Bobby, thank you again, and have fun at TGS, and this was great.
Thank you very much, Graham.
All right, that's going to wrap up our show for this week. We want to thank Bobby again for joining us. If you want to find out more about Curve Games, head over to curvegames.com. For more information on Mudstack, head over to mudstack.com, where you'll find everything you want to know about our platform and where you can follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and join our Discord. And last but certainly not least, we want to thank you for listening. We'll see you next time on Clear as Mud.